And I did want to mention that it's a nice little tradition that we started, which is that we're doing a month of gratitude and appreciation, and we're doing a bunch of free stuff, including additional workshops. With that out of the way, today's focus is on resilience. As you know, in particular, the Advanced Applied Neuroscience take on what resilience is. Just a quick shout out for people in the room. There are a few people here who have either taken the Foundations program or the full certification program with KCI. So I just want to thank you guys for being here. It means a lot. I will say that from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, we're not so curious about what resilience is, although that's going to be our starting point. We're much more fascinated by what happens if we meet someone in a coaching process where resilience is, I'm going to call it low. We can call it all kinds of different things. And then how do we help them develop greater resilience? That's really the fascination of advanced applied neuroscience, is always how do you, it's not so much what the situation is to explain that from a neuroscience perspective, but how do we facilitate transformation? So with that in mind, if you don't mind, initially just using the chat to start thinking and charting it down, but then I would be happy to open it for discussion. How do you define resilience? And what does it look like when you meet someone who has quote unquote lower resilience in a coaching process? How does it exhibit? So drawing on physics, the concept of resilience really comes from kind of this function of like a material bouncing back, right? So if you distress a material, the resilience of a material in physics is its ability to come back to its original form. Now, we're not talking about original form here in the sense that, you'd necessarily return to exactly the way you were emotionally or otherwise, but you're able to pick yourself up. A sense of agency comes up a lot, right? This sense of empowerment. I loved, Elena, what you said about embodiment, kind of also being able, we talk a lot about being integrated, prefrontal cortex and limbic system being integrated so they're fluently talking to each other. You're no longer distressed. You can come back from it, right? So all that beautiful stuff. Advanced applied neuroscience is actually focused on how do we support people who start from a place where they're not resilient and they don't have this high, this capacity as a high mastery ability. When we meet them when they have low resilience, how do we guide them? How do we help them? How do we support them to develop greater resilience? So that's the focus of advanced applied neuroscience, is always going to be focused on the transformation aspect. So the neuroscience of the transformation, not the neuroscience of the thing itself, right? So now I'm curious about our starting point. Let's imagine you meet someone who is not as resilient. They don't have that sense of agency. They don't bounce back. They don't have, more of that self-acceptance, all those things you shared. They don't have that. What does it look like, if you don't mind sharing in the chat? What does it look like when we have lower resilience, when you meet clients that are struggling with resilience in a coaching setting or a transformation or any kind of change setting? And before we get into the neuroscience of things, or especially advanced applied neuroscience, from a more traditional approach, say that we meet someone like that in coaching. What can we do in a more traditional way before we get to the advanced applied neuroscience to help them develop that greater sense of agency or empowerment or whatever else you want to call it, that allows them in the future when they're hit by events or even within the coaching where they feel more helpless to kind of feel like, okay, I can do this. What can we do? What do you use from your rich experience, from your knowledge, from your familiarity with other models, etc.?
I think sort of in the sessions that I've done over the years, we found that sort of breaking things down into what's within the circle of control what can they then influence, and then what is outside that, and sort of breaking things down, or a situation down, into those sort of buckets, if you like. I find often helps people just recognize, okay, so, I do have a certain amount of agency. There's some stuff that I can do, and whether that's sort of controlling how they respond to a person or a situation, or specific actions they can take as well, or decisions they can take. And then sort of the influence part, sort of moving out, say, okay, well, it's okay to reach out to others, and sort of being okay with admitting they're struggling, or admitting they don't have all the answers. And then for stuff that's completely outside the sort of circle of control, sort of looking at, okay, well, how can I accept that that's not going to be something I can change, and instead sort of reframe perhaps the attitude to that, and look at sort of seeing it in a different way, changing your relationship to it if it's not something that you can change directly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say that that sometimes a person can't believe initially, especially that they're capable or they can cope with that if they feel helpless. They just, yeah, can't believe it. So what might help in this situation is actually asking them to look for either a role model or a person who would be able to act differently, and then asking them, how would this person A, who you admire, for example, act, or how would they look at this situation, or but what advice they might give you, or so. And then this will open up the possibility itself, the possibility that there is a solution, or might be a different way of looking things, approaching things, and all of that. Because obviously when we are inside something, it's quite hard to see a way out because people feel stuck or helpless or whatever. So yeah, shifting perspective to somebody else's experience or advice or whatever, and then accessing, as I said, yeah, this possibility, and then transferring and empowering themselves, and then yeah, having these small manageable steps to action upon would be kind of the next step after that. No, I can do that. I can make that phone call or write that email or whatever it might be.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Everything I've heard so far is great. The only thing I would add is just asking people to think about maybe prior situations where they were able to be successful, and kind of remind themselves about their abilities to, get through ambiguous, tough situations.
Thank you. Advanced Applied Neuroscience is not supposed to contradict or minimize or in any way diminish all the skills that you have already shared. The idea is to supplement what you already said with additional tools. So please see what I'm about to say from that lens. So from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, our main focus always, by the way, not just when we're talking about resilience, always, our main focus has to do with how people interact with emotional discomfort. That's our North Star, if you will. So whenever we're having a conversation with our client, that's the thing we're trying to figure out. That's the thing we're trying to change. Support them to develop stronger, more integrated ways of interacting with emotional discomfort that they feel would best serve them. So I'm just curious, when I say how people interact with emotional discomfort, what does that mean to you?
I guess I'd be looking to see how they're telling the story. Like, are they telling it from a perspective that they have no control over it? They have a fleeting control, and then they're able to, but they seem to go back to the old patterns. So I'm just kind of trying to understand how they're having their sense of self and how it's being impacted by kind of the radius around them, to get a better sense of how that distress looks for them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'm nervous actually that I'm going to give the wrong answer. In terms of how people interact, I mean, I just think obviously it really depends on that unique person. So you might have someone who comes to you, like I had a client yesterday, and he was like, everything was just, he was really angry, was and not really pressure of speech, but just, so people's reaction could be fight or flight or freeze. You know, there is obviously those obvious things. And I'm just thinking of examples. So one things I do with clients, because I have this, I'm a resilience practitioner, so we look at things like weak or no boundaries, capacity expectations too high, asking and not being willing to ask for help. So there's 3 key barriers, and they inclined to identify them. But emotional discomfort for many people is saying no. So they'll resist saying no. So like one challenge I might give a client is, in the next week, can you try and say no once a day? And you can see them cringe at the concept of that. So that tells you that they are emotionally uncomfortable with that, which that's just what's coming up in my mind. But generally, people, in terms of emotional discomfort, they could shut down in the conversation they're having with you. They might need to vent quite a lot. Of a client I'm going to talk to tomorrow, and he likes to vent for at least 15 minutes at the beginning of every call. And that's his thing, and they're all different, aren't they? Which is wonderful, and everyone's different. But yes, it's such a wide range of things that you see with clients depending on their unique personality and circumstances. I don't know if that was of any use whatsoever.
That was lovely. Thank you. It's always of use. Always of use. Thank you so much for sharing.
So I guess it starts probably from whether they can understand these emotions, right? Whether they can name them, right? Whether they can do this little piece of analysis, what is actually, because, sometimes they come in and, something is wrong. They obviously feel that, but they don't feel what type of emotion is kind of there. When they can name it, first, it's different emotions may need different handling. Second, this little piece of analytics or analysis creates this distance between this emotion and themselves, right? So already they are, 1% out of the situation, right? Which is helpful, right? So I'm just looking for it, right? If they're able to do this, right? And then whatever the emotion is, creating some, typically they don't do this, clients don't do this like themselves, but when they are encouraged, they do. Creating some positive relation with that emotion, even if the emotion is not that positive or helpful, right? Creating this positive link and observing what this emotion is there for. It's probably doing something for them, protecting them from something, or doing something for them. If they can engage in these discussions, that's a good start already, right? That changes the dynamic from negative to constructive, I would say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we have one more hand that I see right now, and then I will wrap this discussion up and we'll keep going, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to share sort of something similar to what everyone said, but also sometimes that emotional discomfort is in the emotional comfort is in being in an unhappy place, or being in the place of I can't get anything, I can't get it done, and that emotional discomfort is with the acknowledgement of actually they've come a far way, or they've done something really good, so they're unable to acknowledge their progress, and that is emotional discomfort for them. So sometimes that balance is there, where you notice that actually they're comfortable in that unhappy place, and they're comfortable not acknowledging their progress or their success, and that discomfort comes in acknowledging themselves.
Thank you guys so much for sharing what you see and how you interpret this from your very rich experience. What I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you kind of a neuroscience, advanced applied neuroscience look at this. And then if anyone who's already been certified or anyone who's taken our foundations program wants to add anything to what I'm saying, please do. So from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, we distinguish between what it looks like, and we do also recognize it in their stories. I love that you said that. That's how we also notice it. So it could look like they believe they have no control, or it could look like they're angry, or it can look like they're not asking for help, or they're not saying no, or that it could look like they're not comfortable with they're not comfortable. I have a client who's declared that she's not comfortable with compliments or anything positive being said about her, and that just reminded me when you said that actually they feel more comfortable staying in the negativity. So it could take all kinds of forms in how it presents, right? That's one thing. But actually, when it came, she said, I'm now worried that I'm going to say the wrong answer. That, and then also mentioned this mechanism of being able to understand and to some degree be able to analyze their emotions. So we separate between what it looks like, and what's actually going on underneath that is causing them to react that way. There's a level underneath how it exhibits from our point of view. This is just how we work. And underneath, there are a bunch of skills and capabilities that if you don't have them, they're going to impact how you interact with emotional discomfort. What do I mean by that? Let me say that again. There are certain abilities, emotional abilities, that if you don't have them, they're going to impact how you interact with emotional discomfort. So, for example, if you don't have high mastery of an ability to notice your emotions, being able to reflect on them, staying in the discomfort of having unpleasant emotions, if you don't have those capacities, then the way you interact with with emotional discomfort will take on it will look a certain way. It will exhibit a certain way. When we're talking about breaking things down and highlighting what is within someone's control. So I was talking about kind of helping them see decisions they can make and what is within their control. We would want to examine their relationship with emotional discomfort through the lens of control. Do they try to take control, give away control too much? Like, what is their relationship with control as a way of interacting with emotional discomfort in general, not just in the sense of the coaching or the current issue that we're discussing right now, but regardless, like, leave the issue aside completely and look and ask. This is what we tell ourselves, right? Look and ask, how are they interacting with emotional discomfort everywhere, all the time, in all kinds of different situations, and change that relationship regardless of the here issue that we're talking about. If we're talking about, so these are just things you guys mentioned, admitting that being able to admit that they're struggling, feeling comfortable with that, feeling comfortable with not having all the answers. If that's a pattern that they have in interacting with emotional discomfort, we're now curious to look at that pattern and change it in general, not just here in this particular incident. If they catastrophize, or if they feel like they don't have options, or even if they generally believe they have options, but when they come up against emotional discomfort, their first reaction is that they don't feel like they have options, they feel trapped, then that pattern needs to change. And again, it needs to change across the board. The reason this is so important from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective is because these patterns of interacting with emotional discomfort, They're some of the most, of course, they're very emotional. They're emotional and they're tied to threat, which are two of the most strongly embedded patterns that you can have in a brain. Those threat and emotional cues are some of the strongest embedding powers that the brain uses. So because the way we interact with emotional discomfort is linked to those two factors, it is probably the hardest pattern, or one of the hardest patterns to change in a human. And if you start kind of focusing on it, again, this is everything that's coming out of my mouth is from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective. If you focus on these patterns in a very particular context only, so let's say, we're only talking about your relationship with your child, or we're only talking, this is the topic you're bringing up, or we're only talking about that pattern in the context of the stress that you're experiencing with your boss at work, or whatever, right? Or decision making, or like only about decision making, or only about conflict, right? If I'm only taking like a fraction of you and I'm examining how you interact with emotional discomfort only in that fraction, because of the strength of that pattern, it is going to become very, very difficult to change. So from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, to change the way people interact with emotional discomfort, you need many, many varied reference points to help that client transform that particular pattern. I'm going to pause for a moment because I actually said quite a lot. I said it fast, but I feel like I said quite a lot. And I'd love for you, if you could just try to capture what do you even hear me say? If you can start with that, what do you hear me say? What am I saying? And then where does this meet you with your experience? What kind of follow-up thoughts does it generate? Any insight, any question? Where is this taking you? What I just said.
What I've heard you were saying, so the question, how do people interact with an emotional discomfort? And then second part of it, well, through the lens of control, whether they can control that or not control that. And also it being a pattern rather than specific to conflicts or relationships or whatever. And because it's a pattern, we need to find this evidence that this is a pattern, that I encounter this emotional discomfort, let's say, or ability to control it or not only in the relationships, but also at work maybe, or also with friends, or also when I'm parenting. And that's the data, as far as I understood. And then you work with data. You understand. It's like having this awareness and clarity that because it's a pattern, I need to approach it as a pattern rather than something specific to this particular situation. And then it's about, how do I handle or not handle this emotional discomfort? And when you were saying that, for me, again, it's a lot about embodiment again, because that's generated in the body. And it can be changed through the body as well.
Thank you so much.
Sorry. Sort of listening to what you were describing there, I think I've noticed that, or it's sort of reminding me, I guess, of the fact that people can respond very, very differently, and those patterns might look very, very different depending on the person themselves. So I'm just sort of thinking, plenty of clients that we're working with, but even just within my own family, where my daughter and my husband are extremely introverted, and would basically, the pattern we see is sort of shut down, ignore the emotion, sort of try and push it away, whereas my son will explode his full-on emotion. That's much more, and I'm sort of somewhere in between, I guess. So I think it's interesting to notice that yes, we're all humans and we've all got the same sort of hormones pinging around inside, but the way that those show up and the way that they drive our behaviors can be very, very different. And often when I'm thinking of leaders we work with, they often don't maybe recognize that the way they're responding to stress might be very, very different to the way their team members are responding to it. And therefore they don't recognize signs, they miss the patterns, missing them because they don't fit their own patterns. So perhaps sort of our view of sort of what these patterns look like can be sort of biased perhaps by our own tendencies and sort of not recognizing that it might look different in other people.
Thank you.
Observing that pattern, to see it either in others, as they mirror back to us, the discomfort piece. Most people, I don't think, even have a check-in with. So there's this gap, this like huge void of, what is it, like lack of knowing. Ray, you use integration like when we came in, and it's like, what's that alignment with, like, call it mind, body, heart, soul. I don't know what all the language is, but just that integration of all of the wisdom that comes in, sensing something, thinking something through research. And I don't want to hypothesize, but there's this always crisis mode. Everything's got to be done in a minute. So there's no contemplative moment to integrate. And I have been saying lately is like, that is creating chaos and stress, and I'm sure a whole host of other activities. I'm seeing high stress. So what comes up for me when I hear you talk about the discomfort with emotion, I'm not sure people have a language for it, and they default to the outer edges of, I'm good. Thanks for the provocation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Some people who doesn't have the capabilities or skills of, maybe, I would say, empathy. I mean, acceptance of understanding and having tolerance, and maybe not being, judgmental, like you mentioned. I totally agree with you, because then you're not that maybe biased or feeling like you already have a mindset of being, judging people, or having, already thinking that it's something negative. You being more open and more curious, being more active listening to actually what people are saying to you, instead of coming into a room having your own mindset of how a person should act or should be or should say, whether you're a coach or not. I think that is also important. So I think empathy is something, I think it's an important word here. And it's not only being like empathy, being a nice person, it's also being, open to other people's opinions and not taking it personal. I think that is also something very important.
So what I heard is, like, I understood this in the context of this balancing kind of the limbic brain kind of things with prefrontal cortex kind of, emotions, discomfort, all these things, they would probably triggered or start from limbic brain, right? The things that you listed, it's a list of activities, list of abilities, list of things that you can master, that you can learn, that you can train, that you can, which is the, the prefrontal cortex kind of conscious planned activity, right? So you're throwing something actionable against something emotional, right? Which I think is good in the sense that you can do something about this, right? Because emotions are no longer mysterious, something hidden, something is happening in this little gland somewhere there, amygdala, whatever, right? You have tools to work with them, right? Using the conscious part of your brain, right? So I understand this it resonated with me in that context, right? I would say.
I appreciate that reflection. Thank you so much.
I heard the notion of layers. So the first layer I heard was, what does it look like? Like understanding that emotional discomfort. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's not asking for help. So that's the first layer I heard. The second layer I heard is being curious about what's going on underneath that, to create the anger, or you're not feeling, like you want to be out of the uncomfortable zone.
Thank you for that. Want to take 4 minutes if anyone who's taken the KCI programs wants to add anything here. You're welcome to. Just want to create space for that.
Yeah, so in terms of the definition as you're talking about it, the big breakthrough for me in the class was that primarily people that I work with, because they're primarily high potential, so they're high functioning at some cost to them that they realize, but they don't know how to address it. And it goes back to the fact that they don't know that they have a choice to do something differently that they've gotten so comfortable doing over their career and have been rewarded for and have been successful by doing it. And so and also because I primarily work with engineers, I very slowly introduced the concept of feelings early on to just get them a little more comfortable of understanding that it's not just something you can see, feel, or hear, or touch, whatever. But I think that the biggest impact I've been able to have is when they realize they have a choice. And I don't think about it in terms of unlearning the old way that you used to do it, but first realizing you don't have to do the same thing that you've been doing, especially when you know it's not working for you. Just to stop and remember you have a choice. So that was the most powerful thing I got out of looking at it from your and the organization's perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we have 1 more minute if anyone else wants to share. There's a bunch of people here that I don't want to name you if you don't want to self-identify, but if you wanted to share additional thoughts, I just want to create some space.
I'll share. One thing that I'm remembering is a bit of like, a client can come to you with an issue or a problem, but getting underneath, and I like how you were saying that the layers. I would add like the layer under that is, I think what you were talking about, Rayu, is what skills you have or don't have to face that emotional discomfort. So then when you're working with the client, it's like you're not going for that thing that's on the surface. It's like a back door to build those skills that apply to all emotional discomfort, which is going to be all your problems, right? So yeah, I'm thinking about that, remembering that piece right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, can I just say something as someone who is a very intuitive coach? And so it's not that I don't want to understand neuroscience, it's that it's a bit terrifying for me to remember all the words. So when I listen to you, and I've been doing this work 16 odd years, maybe a bit more now, I'm thinking that what you're talking about is growing the client's skill in self-awareness, so that as they look at their emotional discomfort, they start to understand, notice, and explore those things. So they grow their self-awareness and they catch themselves when they're in that feeling, and they can start, as I think what Pure was trying to say, sorry, Pure, trying to say that, they can actually start to articulate, or at least feel, oh, that feels like that, or I don't feel happy. Oh, that, do you know what I mean?
So we actually, just to interrupt you, I didn't want to dive into that, but just because now it's brought up twice, just to clarify, but we don't actually work through awareness. we work through subconscious programming. It's still conversational, but the techniques that we use, because these patterns they are limbic, like Piotr said, they are limbic. So that system in the brain is way too fast for consciousness to moderate it. So rather than have the traditional approach that says, I'm going to develop your awareness, then you're going to act in all kinds of different ways when emotional discomfort comes up, and then your conscious mind, your prefrontal cortex, is going to moderate it. We actually program it directly into the limbic to not have to do this bypass, because the bypass is too slow. It's just too slow. So it's eventually going to work. Piotr, what you said eventually is going to work. It's just going to take, from an advanced applied neuroscience perspective, it's just going to take a lot longer, because you're going to keep acting, and then you have to wait for the conscious mind to kick in and rewrite what you did. So rather than do that, we actually engage the limbic system directly. When you do the exercises, when you do the coaching process this way, you all of a sudden discover that you're interacting with emotional discomfort differently than you have in the past. And then your prefrontal cortex goes and looks at it and says, what happened here? How did I start reacting differently than I was used to? It's more like that than that our awareness is monitoring. So hopefully that's helpful. I really wasn't intending on diving into
Okay, I got it. Yeah, no,
yeah, it's
that
not
all
important.
that does make a lot of sense.
So what has this got to do with resilience? Why am I saying that the way we change, the way we interact with our emotional discomfort is a critical component, that if we want to support people to become more resilient, that we need to change the way people interact with emotional discomfort?
Well, I know just personally for me, if I'm really triggered, it's hard for me to see, possibilities, engage in, productive, proactive, creative, almost, and, to take risks and things, so that, and I don't know if you mean, if triggered covers the entire spectrum of what you're talking about with regard to emotion, but with that one specific, it can really be limiting.
Thank you.
For me, and I appreciate, Frank, you putting the word triggered, because I was thinking about something else. So being triggered adds to the picture for me. But I was thinking more about this, again, feeling of helplessness. And it's a feeling, right? For example, and it's applicable to me. When I am being proactive and taking steps and trying to reach my goal, for example, and I don't see the response to my actions, that might be very disheartening, and I might feel helpless, which is not necessarily that I'm triggered, right? So, and then it's a lot about resilience, because it's about whether I quit and say, doesn't matter, whatever I do doesn't bring me to my desired outcome. Or if my resilience is high, I would say, okay, maybe I need to shift the way I approach things, or what else I can do, or how I can do it differently, for example, to get a different outcome. So then it's directly linked, in my view, to how I treat this emotional discomfort, in this case, helplessness, to the resilience. Nevertheless, I proceed. That's okay. No stands for next opportunity. So what's my next opportunity? And that's resilience. So these are my thinking. This is my thinking.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's making me think, especially the extremes, just a kind of throw in here. When we're talking about the way we're interacting with emotional discomfort, and it's actually very related to threat. I brought that up earlier. That is because in our everyday, when something kicks us off balance, and we're talking about resilience, in the end, it comes down to these type of emotional responses to discomfort that is either going to allow us to bounce back effectively or not. As we're talking about what can we do to support people to build greater resilience, and if you don't mind, in your own voice, share what are you taking away from today. It could be something I said, it could be something someone else said, it could be just an insight that came to you as you're listening to someone else from your own experience. But one thing that you're taking away that can help your clients in the future as you're working with them through coaching to build greater resilience.